The long-awaited Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson, Bret Weinstein debate is out on YouTube, and we're going to start picking through it. This is Matthew Garnett. Welcome to In Layman's Terms.
Islam doesn't represent any impediment to stem cell research. Orthodox Judaism and Christianity in the States was posing an impediment to embryonic stem cell research.
Better than the way it's being run.
You all have heard me say I'd love to debate Sam Harris, but this is probably about as close as I'm ever going to come in debating him. I'm just going to kind of insert myself into this debate here and there. I've kind of tried to pick through it and prepare for it a bit. I definitely will have an advantage against him in a sense because I already know what he's going to say. I've had a chance to think about it, but it's what Sam Harris always says, and I have the same arguments against it. It's just different ways to come at it, and it's always good to review this stuff. Good for me. Hopefully this is helpful to you as well. But before we get to all that, let me remind you of our Kenyan Christian arts at laymanstermsradio.org. Just go there, peruse our arts, and buy a nice piece of art for upcoming birthday or an anniversary or something like that. Christmas time's coming up, something to think about there. Also, make sure to give $50 to our well project. We've had some really nice donations come in as of late, and we're kind of creeping our way toward it. Looking forward to having Monica Ocholo on again to talk about the project and getting some testimonials from Kenya there with the children going to the Kibos Hope Academy school. And yeah, we could just really do some great things there. Make this domino fall of drilling this well for them would be a great help. And if we could make that happen, that would just be so significant. I can't even describe how helpful, helpful is not even the word, it would be. You know, again, just to remind you that the kids only have access to water at the school 2 to 3 days a week. The rest of the time they have to go fetch water from local streams and rivers, and that's going to, you know, after you already, some of these children, if you listen to the interview with Monica, she told us about how some of these children walk, you know, round trip 2, 3, 4, 5 miles just to get to school, let alone having to lug water from local rivers and streams for the day, and you know how that might cut into your energy to focus and learn and be educated. So if you haven't given your $50 yet, please do so as soon as possible, and so we can make this a reality for Kibos Hope Academy. Okay, so I was going to try to break this down kind of by theme. Not going to really do that. I'm just going to kind of pick out a few sound bites here and there, interact with them, and yeah, just kind of see how this goes, see how much of this we can get through. Some of it's really fascinating. I got to tell you my approach here a bit. I'm going to be debating more with Sam Harris than with Jordan Peterson. Personally, you know, as far as Jordan Peterson defending Holy Scripture goes, just find his approach fairly inane and not very defensible. In fact, you know, I would really say that Harris won this debate against Jordan Peterson, although I really like Jordan Peterson. I'm glad that he sees some value in the scriptures and tries to defend them. And I think he does make some valid points. You know, he really presses Sam Harris on this idea of, you know, really getting back to first principles and these sorts of things, you know, which we'll kind of discuss as we go on. But he really never quite gets there. You know, he wants to psychologize the entirety of Holy Scripture, and you know, if he thinks that's what the writers were really trying to get at, okay, fine. That's perfectly legitimate, but I'm not sure if he thinks that that's really what they were trying to say. In other words, he's really thinks that's what the authors meant when they wrote it, or if this is just one among many interpretations. Which, you know, if the second option is true, if he just kind of believes that his psychologizing of the Bible is one interpretation among many that could be useful and helpful and this sort of thing, well, that's really not much. I mean, Sam Harris completely has him there, because Harris, you know, demonstrates very well that you can take any text or any set of facts, and, you know, if you squint hard enough and think about it hard enough and, you know, interpret them in a certain way and look at them this way, you can make any text say anything you want. And that's absolutely true. And I think Jordan Peterson does that a lot with Holy Scripture. I appreciate Peterson's stance for morality and for certain things that are going on in politics right now. I think it's very helpful that he stood against this C-16 bill in Canada, which, you know, requires people to use the preferred pronouns of transgender people. I think that is a bulwark against that kind of tide that of the sexual revolution. That's been very helpful, and kind of his no-nonsense approach to life is helpful. But as a defender of Holy Scripture, no. I would rather, he spent, probably 3 to 4 hours just in this discussion alone in Vancouver with Harris. I would rather have seen Harris spend 3 to 4 hours discussing this with William Lane Craig. That would have been much more productive, much more helpful, and a much better defense. But, who knows? I guess it doesn't attract the audiences or whatever the case may be. I wish Jordan Peterson would bring somebody in that had a little more expertise in this area than he has. So at any rate, and frankly, Sam Harris is not what I would call an expert atheist. In fact, I have yet to see a real expert atheist. That would require you studying all the world's religions thoroughly and being able to disprove them one by one by one. And we're going to see that Harris does not know the Bible. He knows the parts he wants to cherry pick. He knows, and he picks them out, and then he strawmans them and trashes the entirety of Holy Scripture. That's kind of how he rolls. He obviously hasn't studied the thing, because again, if you go read a book like Is God a Moral Monster? We reviewed that book here a while back. Go read a book like that. Somebody who studied the New Testament scriptures, the scriptures are clear. However, in order to get what's going on there, you have to study them. They are clear, but even when people, there are technical books, say an engineering book that is perfectly clear, but unless you're a trained engineer, it's not going to be clear to you in a lot of ways. Now, I don't think you have to be a trained theologian to be able to read Holy Scripture, but it does help. I mean, you got somebody like a Copan who wrote Is God a Moral Monster, who is literally a Jewish lawyer, literally could have been a Jewish lawyer. He's studied the law that carefully, and he can explain it to you. That would be an apt comparison to say, compare the Jewish law to our law code. Okay, you wouldn't go into court without a lawyer, ever. And in fact, depending on what kind of litigation you're getting ready to engage in, you'd find a lawyer that specialized in that field. You wouldn't try to defend yourself. You would find somebody that could study, spend their time preparing your defense, and fully understand the law. I mean, our laws are clear. It's just that you've got to be able to put them all together in a coherent way. It's a large body of work, as are the Jewish laws. See, so, and that's what Copan did such a wonderful job of, and that's where Harris is just completely incapable, and really, quite frankly, I haven't ever seen him address some of those areas, but we're going to. I'm going to challenge some of those things that Harris brings up, and even challenge his worldview as best I can, and hopefully it'll be helpful to you in kind of thinking through these things yourself, and bringing confidence to your own faith, so that when the world, the devil, and our sinful nature attacks your faith, you can readily defend the faith, and if the occasion presents itself, use it as an evangelical tool. Okay, we won't gild the lily any further here. Let's get to the debate between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson, moderated by Bret Weinstein. Here we go.
So that just to close the loop on that, the only reason why I would focus on religion in particular there is that religion is the only language game wherein fundamentalism and dogmatism, where dogmatism is not a pejorative concept. Dogma is a good word, specifically within Catholicism, and the notion that you must believe things on faith, that is in the absence of compelling evidence that would otherwise cause a rational person to believe it, that in a religious context is considered a feature, not a bug. Elsewhere, we recognize it to be a bug, and that's why the unique focus on religion.
So for Harris, dogmatism is essentially believing things completely on faith. It's a belief, based on complete fideism with no underlying evidence. Now, there are certainly people out there who will just say, whatever the Bible says, I believe it. I don't have to have any evidence for it. That's certainly out there, and that seems to get a lot more publicity than those of us who have a reason for our faith. But Christianity, rightly understood, now, admittedly, we rely on some amount of fideism. There is a place where we say, you know what, we have to take that step of faith. But it's not without reasons, even for its dogma. I mean, I'm a Lutheran, right? We have an entire field dedicated to dogmatics, and the whole point of that field is to put together reasoned arguments for why we believe what we believe. Harris's definition of dogmatism is really an argument that proves too much. It's something that if he's going to decry believing something on faith, that's going to really work against him as he goes through this debate. Even Harris has a set of dogmatics, and we'll see that as we move on here.
Well, I think one has to acknowledge that there's something uniquely pernicious, at least potentially, about religious beliefs, because they have the otherworldly variable, the supernatural variable, the you're going to get everything you want after you die, so this life doesn't matter issue. That allows for a kind of misbehavior that is especially
so it seems that
so that's an example of Harris straw manning an argument. I don't know one Christian that believes that how we behave in this life doesn't matter. Not one Christian. I've heard of Christians that act like that. I can do whatever I want in this life, I'll just get whatever I want in the afterlife. So they mistreat people. That's not. It's not pernicious. I mean, a Christian, misbehaving in that way is not causing widespread mayhem. It's not something to be feared. Now, maybe you wouldn't want your daughter dating somebody that behaved that way. I certainly wouldn't. But again, that just shows that Harris hasn't really studied any good arguments of Christians. He strawmans the best Christian apologetics, and this is one of Harris's things that he says. He wants to do. He wants to be able to state the opposition's argument in the best terms, and he does that for everybody else except for Christians or any religion, really. See, and that's a problem. That's a problem. And in a debate, in a formal sense, if you're in a formal debate and you're being judged, I used to do a little bit of this, that you would get points off for that. That's called straw manning. Every time you commit a logical or rhetorical fallacy, the judge goes, straw manning, and then you get a few points off, and you may not win that debate if you continue to do that. So that's what Harris seems to do. He doesn't seem to he puts forth a few good arguments against Holy Scripture, which with a little more study could be explained, but for the most part he spends his time straw manning and producing ad hominem attacks. Remember, if you remember when we went through the debate with he and William Lane Craig, that's kind of where he went. He didn't have an argument against Craig, so he just bounced off and started basically straw manning and sending ad hominem attacks at Holy Scripture. So that's an example of that. It's going to be kind of thematic throughout this debate.
That held sway to a point where apostasy and blasphemy were killing offenses. The people who didn't toe the line were eradicated, and so to take a more modern example, North Korea is a religious cult. It just doesn't happen to be a one that is focused on the next life or supernatural claims of magic.
Okay, so here comes the authority piece. He's talking about these authoritarian dictatorships, but my question to Harris would be, okay, fair enough, but what's really going on there? My opinion is that you take a guy like Mao, the Kim regime, Stalin, Lenin, Hitler. These are men who put themselves in the place of God and took that kind of authority. And that's why they look like religious cults, because everybody worships the leader. And if they don't swear fealty to the leader, then they're done with. I would challenge Harris to give me a system that was run by men where authoritarianism wasn't going to creep in. How would he set these things up? Would he set up the Harris regime? I mean, what would he do if I was a Christian baker and I didn't want to bake a cake for a gay wedding in his regime? Would he kind of go along with Michael Shermer? You guys remember this from a few months back, right? Michael Shermer talking about getting the National Guard out for bakers, that they're going to have to bring the gun to kind of get us all in line here. That's pretty frightening stuff, especially when you're a religious person. I would like, and I don't assume that Harris would buy for authoritarianism. That would seem to fly in the face of many of his arguments. However, what is he vying for here? If you're going to do away with religion, if religion is considered something dangerous, then in the ideal society, what if you had somebody who was religious, wasn't hurting anybody with their religion, but then how do you define that? I mean, I bring my children up in the faith. They go to Lutheran schools. Would that be considered child abuse? I mean, where are you going to take this, and who's going to have the authority to do it? Right. That's kind of where I'd like to see Harris challenged a little bit on this sort of thing. And just so you know, here's my solution to it. We have a third party in all of this who is the authority, and that's God. And again, you remember kind of my three-tiered argument for the necessity of God and Holy Scripture is that we need an authority to tell us what the deal is, to kind of lay down the law. Somebody that's outside of us humans who can take that authority without abusing it. And it seems like a perfect being with all knowledge and all wisdom would be that figure that we need. I mean, that's just a philosophical argument. One thing you're going to kind of hear Peterson and Harris go back and forth on is this whole notion of, well, there may or may not be a God, but we should live like there is a God. Well, that's kind of my argument with the authority thing is, okay, let's just presuppose for a minute, just for the sake of argument, there's no God. But here's why we should pretend like there is a God, because we need an authority that's above humanity. We need that, because otherwise somebody's going to fill that vacuum. And we also need to fear that there are both temporal and eternal consequences for our actions. See, so there's the authority piece, and then we're going to get into all this, and again, the scope of the morality. Harrison's moral program is very limited in scope, as is any really atheist or anybody who rejects God. It would be an atheist, and then on top of that, the amount of time it takes. So you remember, I keep referring back to got Bret Weinstein involved in this. His wife Heather Hine, talking to Joe Rogan about how they've kind of come to the conclusion that having a monogamous relationship between a man and a woman that produces children is the best. That's the most satisfying or fulfilling sexually, right? And after how long since the Enlightenment have they come up with that? So it takes a long time to come up with a good moral code, and even then it's questionable, right? Can it change? Can it not change? How does all that work? It just seems to make a lot more sense to hope that we have God's voice, and again, we do. We have God's voice, and we can rely on it, as we'll demonstrate.
Yeah, they're very similar. I mean, the problem is dogmatism. The overarching problem is believing things strongly on bad evidence, and and the reason why dogmatism is so dangerous is that it doesn't allow us to revise our bad ideas in real time through conversation. Dogmas have to be enforced by force or the threat of force. Because the moment someone has a better idea, you have to shut it down in order to preserve your dogmas.
Okay. So the commonality seems to be something like claims of absolute truth at some level that you're no longer allowed to discuss.
All right. So here is. This is interesting, because I would like to get into some specifics with Harris. about this whole dogma issue. And here's where his dogmatism comes in. He claims that dogmatism is believing in something without good evidence, without significant evidence. And Harris does this. He does it with abortion, he does it with gay marriage, and he does it with evolution. And I would challenge him on all three pieces. And you're going to see him bring these various issues up. Abortion, be very simple to challenge him on that with, okay, show me the conclusive evidence that life does not begin at conception. Is there any doubt whatsoever? And then compare that to perhaps one of your own children that maybe got kidnapped or something like that. If there was any, they got kidnapped, they've been kidnapped for a long time. If there was any doubt whatsoever that they were still alive, would you stop looking? That's what I would challenge him with. Because if Harris were honest, he would admit that we don't know exactly when life begins. Now, I think the evidence is clearly on the side it begins at conception, and I think that's the safest way to do it. It begins at conception. So there's some of his dogmatism. Hey, we should have abortions, and he's going to say this. We should kill babies so we can do stem cell research on them. That's where he's going to go with that. Now, if that's not dogmatism, I'm not sure what is. That is practically an article of faith in secular society today, is to have abortion be legal. That's a piece of his dogmatism there, clearly. Same thing with gay marriage. I can reasonably defend the scripture's prohibition of gay marriage. You've heard me do it in many podcasts. I know the whole history of it. I maybe haven't brought that up before, but I could eviscerate him on that issue with reason, with reasonable data and evidence about how detrimental to health it is, both among men especially, but among women too, on down the line, and what the roots of homosexuality are, these sorts of things. That's another thing that he's committed to dogmatically. If we're going to define dogma as believing in something without significant evidence, same thing with evolution. This is something I couldn't argue nearly as well as some of the scientists that are creation scientists, guys like Jason Lyle and so forth. But I would just challenge him with, hey, we have zero evidence of any cross-species evolution. Just challenging him with that piece. See? And so this whole idea of dogma, that he's struggling with dogmatism, and to see, I think that what would happen is, I would imagine if I got the opportunity to debate Sam Harris and I brought these things up to him, he would just mock me and laugh at me and these sorts of things, because these are things that are in our culture, in our society right now, are kind of settled things among the secularists at least. And to question anything like abortion or gay rights or evolution is that's just ridiculous and stupid. So those items aren't up for discussion anymore. And here they are talking about how, Christianity, or Christianity in particular. I think Harris has really got some focus on Islam here. But, I mean, reasonable Christians are willing to discuss anything in the scripture. You can question it. I question the Bible all the time. This is what we do in theology. I mean, what do you think theologians do? Just sit around and memorize dogmas from ages old? No, they discuss these things. They debate them. They question them. I question things in my own confession sometimes. I don't understand them. It's like, well, this is here. It doesn't seem to make sense with the scriptures, and we discuss it. Or, here's you gave this opinion on that. Well, I don't think that's right. This is what theology is all about, is questioning and inquiring about these things. This is what theologians do. We just don't sit around and pontificate on things. No, it's a questioning of God's word. It's an asking. It's a searching out to see what's really there. And so this whole notion that Christianity is this, hard-nosed, we've got, don't dance, drink, smoke, or chew, and, just sit around and wait for Jesus to come back. idea is a complete straw man, and that's what he's basing his arguments on, and that's where he's getting this idea of dogmatism, where religions, all they do is believe in stuff that has no evidence whatsoever, and A, Harris is guilty of the same thing, and B, no, we don't. It's a complete straw man. All right, let's move on.
So clearly, and this is true for morality, most pressingly, but it's true for science, it's true for economics, it's true for anything else that we are wise to pay attention to. It's like slavery is condoned in the Bible, in both Testaments, and in the Quran. There's no getting away from that. Now, you can say, well, it's not the central thrust of any of these books, but if you go to the books and try to figure out what the creator of the universe wants with respect to the owning and needless immiseration of other people, right? He expects you to keep slaves, and he's told you how to do it. Don't knock out their eyes and their teeth. Don't take, if you're a Muslim, don't take other Muslims as slaves. But it's not an accident that the people who joined ISIS thought that it was absolutely kosher to take slaves.
Okay, so that's kind of funny. He said absolutely kosher. He's a Jew, and he's talking about Muslims who evidently, especially ISIS, Islamicists hate Jews. Kosher, it's got a very funny play on words, actually. I'm not sure if he meant to do that or not. But anyway, so this is where Copan again comes in very handy and is very helpful in all of this, because really slavery in the Jewish law code was an anti-poverty relief program. That's what, again, if you haven't read Is God a Moral Monster, you need to pick that up. It is an absolutely crucial reference book for apologetics. I'm just so happy that I ran across that because Copan just does a great job explaining everything and putting everything together for us. In fact, that verse, that part of the Bible where the law says you can't knock out the teeth or poke out the eyes of your slaves, there are rules for how slaves are to be treated in the Old Testament. Compare that to the chattel slavery of early America. There were no rules for how slaves were to be treated. You could treat them any way you wanted to. So which was better? How the Jews treated their slaves, or how early Americans treated their slaves? And Harris makes no distinction between the two. In fact, he doesn't want to. Go back to that William Lane Craig Harris debate, and William Lane Craig tries to bring that out. I believe, if I'm thinking of the right debate, I've watched so many debates on this sort of thing. But there's a difference between the slavery that's prescribed in the Jewish law code and the chattel slavery of the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries in America. 16th, not quite 16th, sorry, they probably dropped that year. But the point being, if you understand how that is put together, what happens if one of the Jewish brethren falls into poverty, say he has a crop fail, and he has to take a loan, and then he has another crop fail, and he can't pay back the loan, then he can say, hey, look, I'll just come to work for you, the person I owe this debt to. It's, kind of like a debtor's, I'm losing the term right now, but he would go to work for the person he owed the money to. Instead of just letting him starve to death or waller in poverty, unable to pay the person back, God said, no, you take the person into your house. They're called your slave, your servant. It's illegal, as Harris cites, to abuse the slave. It's illegal on pain of death to murder a slave in the Old Testament. And there are very strict restrictions on how you can discipline a slave. On top of that, you're commanded to free the slaves every 7 years. It's nothing like chattel slavery at all. It's a complete anachronistic argument. So to kind of demonstrate this, let me read Nehemiah 5 to you, and I'll show you what I'm talking about here. Okay, so Nehemiah 5 says, now there arose a great outcry of the people and of their wives against their Jewish brothers. For there were those who said, with our sons and daughters we are many, so let us get grain that we may eat and keep alive. There were also those who said, we are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our houses to get grain because of the famine. And there were those who said, we have borrowed money for the king's tax on our field and our vineyards. Now our flesh is as the flesh of our brothers, our children as their children. Yet we are forcing our sons and our daughters to be slaves, and some of our daughters have already been enslaved. But it is not in our power to help it, for other men have our fields and our vineyards. And Nehemiah answers this. He says, I was very angry when I heard their outcry and these words. I took counsel with myself, and I brought charges against the nobles and the officials. I said to them, you are exacting interest, each from his brother. You are exacting interest, each from his brother. So what's going on here? What was going on was there was a famine, and these people were forced to sell their property to people. But in order to stay alive, they were going in debt, and that would happen. This was allowed, but what was not allowed was for the Jews to charge each other interest on these loans. And because they had been charged interest on the loans, they weren't able to pay the loans back, and then therefore these people that had given them these loans with interest took them into slavery. And so instead of trying to help their brother out, they took advantage of their brother, and they charged them interest in order that they couldn't pay back the loan, and then took them into slavery. And Nehemiah rebukes them for this. He goes on to say, I held a great assembly against them and said to them, we, as far as we are able, have bought back our Jewish brothers who have been sold to the nations, but you even sell your brothers that they may be sold to us. They were silent and could not find a word to say, of course, because they were wrong. They were charging their brothers interest and causing them to fall into slavery. So I said, the thing that you are doing is not good. Ought you not walk in the fear of our God? All right. So that's proof positive right there that even though slavery was allowed, interest, to put somebody in slavery purposefully was not allowed. It was the only reason somebody would go into slavery is because they were in debt to somebody, and that was a way they could get out of debt. And in 7 years, if they, that was enough time to pay off any debt in God's eyes, and they were freed. And that's really what it was. And on top of that, what you have to, the other argument I put forth to Harris is to say, okay, let's just say for the sake of argument that the Bible is a book that was written completely by men. They had slavery, and I've just described to you what the slavery is for and how they are to treat slaves. Are you familiar with how slaves were treated in other cultures in the ancient Near East? And he's probably not. But the accounts, the few of them that we have, the slaves, it was more like chattel slavery. It was brutal. I mean, again, I would ask him which would be better, the slavery of the Bible or the slavery of the 1800s before the Civil War. And he could not help but answer the slavery of the Bible. Yeah, that's right. So God's program for Israel was a vast improvement over what was going on around everybody else. He knew that slavery might be a part of things. This was kind of the nature of men, and if God were to forbid slavery, the people, it might have been too much for them to handle or understand. And so he was bringing them along. He was making progress. I would say, Sam, buddy, you believe in progress, right? We want to make progress. We want to make moral improvement. This is a vast moral improvement from what was going on beforehand. And that's all it was. See, you might not like it. It might not be the improvements we've made up to this point in this country with the information we have now, but it was a vast improvement from what was before. It was a huge leap forward. So wouldn't you say that's a good thing? Yeah, wouldn't you say that was a good model at least to follow? I mean, we don't want to follow the model of slavery. We don't need slavery anymore. We can get people out of poverty in all kinds of different ways now. But wouldn't you say that progress is good? That taking a step forward from something bad to something better is the idea? Yeah, see, that's what I would challenge him with. And that's just something that's completely out of Harris's scope or vision to contend with these ideas. And it's too bad too. Again, I would love to debate him and challenge him with some of these things. Give me 4 hours with him and see what happens. And I'm not even an expert. I wish they would, again, get a real expert on this. Okay, let's move on to the next thing here.
To take sex slaves, and they were even their use of their sex slaves was conducted as a sacrament, and that's not an accident. I mean, they were praying over the Yazidi girls before they raped them. So this is not unlike what many people expect. It's not that this doctrine is being used as a pretext for people who would otherwise do terrible things like take sex slaves and rape them. And so there's no net damage being done here by this belief system. No, these are, I would argue, in many cases, psychologically normal people who are simply convinced of the absolute veracity of these ideas. And in this case, the perfect example of Muhammad as the most self-actualized human who's ever existed. And what did Muhammad do? Muhammad took sex slaves. So then once you grant that, and this is where there's a tension between how we pursue the same goals. Like as we've just established, we have many of the same goals. But insofar as you make religion look palatable, insofar as you suggest to your audience that they can have their religious cake and eat it too, they can have their reason, they can have their respect for science, they can have a 21st century worldview, but they can also hold on to everything they love in Christianity or fear to lose. And it's undoubtedly mostly Christianity, but whatever, any religion. My concern is that it keeps us shackled to these Iron Age philosophies and these Iron Age conversations where we should be having a 21st century conversation about everything.
Okay, so hold on, I got to jump in there a little bit. I was going to let him go on this for a little bit, but that is just, again, a complete straw man of Christianity. We can have a 21st century conversation. Look, Sam, buddy, we can question all of the Bible if you want to. You ready? Let's start questioning it. You give me your question, I'll give you an answer. And that's why that's why I basically excluded Peterson from all this, because the answer he gives is this psychologizing of the Bible. And that just, Harris just obliterates that argument. He says, yeah, you can do that with anything. You can make any text say whatever you want to say. And basically what you're doing is you're making these religions palatable to people, and it's not good because they're going to continue to hold on to these old ways and this old thinking and so on and so forth. And I'm saying to Harris, no, you can ask any questions you want of the Bible, and I can give you a rational, textual argument in defense of the scriptures. I can show you how I can hold on to the Holy Scripture as God's Word in the 21st century. I do it all the time. In fact, again, philosophically, I have no choice. See, I don't know if you guys have heard me say this before, but I was pretty much committed to becoming an atheist, so I picked up Richard Dawkins' God Delusion. That was the last flirtation I had with atheism. Because you want to talk about authoritarian, this sort of, hey, we've got to quit making religion palatable to people. We've got to get people to put religion away. We got to get them to stop believing in it. And what are they going to do with guys like William Lane Craig and me and whoever else knows how to defend the faith? What are they going to do with us Christians who can defend their faith rationally and will not give it up unless it on pain of death? I mean, I took a vow that I would rather die than leave Christ's church. And I did that, and I came by that vow honestly. It wasn't a blind leap of faith, see? And so, if I were to uphold that vow, Harris would have to put a gun to my head and say, give up your religion. We're not doing that anymore, see? And that is frightening to somebody like me, that we would go this direction. He's just never going to convince enough people. I mean, that's what he's going to try to do. He's going to try to convince everybody to get rid of religion. And the reason he doesn't like Peterson is because Peterson goes around and gives people, some sort of, even if it's a psychologizing, he gives people some sort of end to Christianity. That part I don't mind, honestly. It's just that people get stuck there. It's going to be a problem. At any rate, let me let this go on a bit more. I got a couple more things on this section here.
Ethics included.
Okay, so but I want to ask you a little bit about your feeling about...
Wait, before you move on, I want to get each of you to clarify something so that we know where we are. So Sam, you said the problem here is that the dogma can't be updated, right? That slavery is with us permanently because it's written into the dogma. But clearly, most of the traditions in which it's written into the Holy Book don't practice slavery, and the people who adhere to these belief systems wouldn't defend slavery. So clearly there is the capacity for an update mechanism.
Well, no, but not really. I mean, they've been forced, they've had it beaten out of them, right? I mean, we fought a civil...
Okay, hold on. That is not true. I want to jump on this. Gonna hold off here. Let him finish.
Civil war in the U.S. to get rid of slavery.
But was Christians who abolished slavery in England, though?
What was that?
It was Christians who were at the forefront of the movement to abolish slavery in England.
There were Christians on either side of everything. I mean, there's no one else to do the job.
Right, but that's the update mechanism.
Wait a second. But it was specifically Christians who were using their Christian belief as a justification for eradicating slavery.
The problem was they were actually on the losing side of a theological argument. And it would be much better, I think you would agree, if one of the 10 commandments had been, don't keep slaves.
Okay, so there we go. One of the 10 commandments is, don't keep slaves. Don't engage in the chattel slavery that we experienced in the West, say 16th century onward, until England and Western Europe abolished it, and we followed suit. There was not a we weren't on the losing side of a theological debate. There weren't a bunch of atheists in the 19th century running around in North America arguing against Christians to abolish slavery. No, it was Christians using Holy Scripture to argue against slavery. And I suggest that this started with the Reformation. This started with people knowing their Bibles, because I am convinced that one of the consequences for people not knowing their Bibles at the founding of this country was slavery. And as people started to study their Bibles and understand them more, they understood, and at least the founders understood, that each person was made in the image of God. And you find that nowhere else, in no other religion other than the Judeo-Christian religion, that we are made in the image of God, and therefore people should be treated with dignity as human beings made in the image of God. That's what broke the back of chattel slavery in this country. And they weren't on a... This is complete... Again, I don't know if Harris is just ignorant, or he's not thinking through this, or he's purposefully just making these completely inane arguments, because it wasn't a theological debate between atheists and Christians. All these Christians down in the South wanted to keep slavery, and all the atheists in the North wanted to do away with slavery. No, not at all. Peterson is right on this. People used the Scripture and the founding documents to abolish slavery, which were the founding documents were based on Holy Scripture. The fifth commandment forbids the abuse of slaves. And this is backed up, by Genesis 9:6 that says you essentially, and I'm paraphrasing here, but you shall not murder because people are made in the image of God. And that's all. This is way back. This is millennia. This is tens of centuries before before Harris was in the on the scene here talking about this sort of thing. Holy Scripture was prescribing these things. This was backed up by the Jewish law code and reinforced by Christ in the Sermon on the Mount. It is in the Scripture. Love your neighbor as yourself. Even though you had as a Jew, even though you had a slave, you were still to love that person. It doesn't take that sophisticated of a reading of Scripture to understand these things. The abolitionists were on the winning side of the theological debate. By Harris's own admission, there was no one else to force the problem. Right? I already mentioned that. No atheist group existed to beat them working for abolition. The debate was won. Yeah, it was won politically, I'll agree. It was on our founding documents and worked for and this sort of thing. But it was also theologically based, again, on the image of God. This is just a ridiculous argument that Harris is making, and unfortunately, Peterson has no answer for this. And that's the whole thing. Is I just don't get Harris's reading of ancient texts. He doesn't take any culture, any cultural setting into account. He doesn't have any idea what the situation is like. He doesn't situate his arguments in history. He just takes, okay, slavery is what we did in the United States, and so every time slavery is mentioned in any ancient text, that's what it means. No, that's not what it means. Probably the most brutal era of slavery was in the West from, let's say, the 17th century up until the end of the Civil War. That was probably the most brutal era of slavery on record. Now, there's some records of stuff going on in Africa and that sort of thing, but I'm talking about in the West, or as compared to who knows what. But good grief, I mean, I can't imagine slavery being any more brutal than it was in America when it was first founded. This was certainly not prescribed by the scriptures. Anyway, I think I've made my point here. Let's move on. Okay, for this part, you're going to want to turn it off if you've got children in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Think that the lizard king is living in the Oval Office. You never get a 0% response to any poll question, right? But if you ask Muslims on the streets of London, is homosexuality morally acceptable? Apparently, you can find no one who says it is. That's shocking, and it's not an accident, right? And it would be much easier if the book actually said, you can love anyone you want, and it's not a problem.
It is shocking, but I think.
Okay, so here I would have jumped all over Harris. This would have been my big opening. This would have been like him leading with his jaw in a boxing match. Because I would have said, does loving whoever you want, homosexual practice, this would have been Sam, does homosexual practice, quote unquote, loving whoever you want, promote human flourishing? If so, how? And I would have him lay that out for me. Okay, define love. I would have him define love for me. And then I would have said, okay, so you're telling me that one man sodomizing another is loving. Would you say that it's okay for, if a woman agrees to have her husband beat her every night, that's perfectly fine if she agrees? I mean, so again, sodomy is an act of violence. It's plain and simple as that. And that's the thing I think we miss in this a lot of times, and I've mentioned this before. That's the thing I think we miss in this whole sexual revolution debate, is we don't talk about the fact that sodomy is an act of violence. That's where it has its roots, its origins. And he and I would have went back and forth on this. We could have am I not making a reasonable argument here? I mean, so this would have been fisticuffs right here. But maybe Peterson's a little wiser than I am here. That probably would have derailed the whole thing. People would be freaking out. I mean, you can't, think about the freak out that everybody's had over Peterson not using people's preferred pronouns, that sort of thing. It would have been mayhem. It would have been mayhem, and I would have loved it. but that's the question I would give to him, is to say, whoa, wait a minute. There's very good reasons why now the typical Muslim may not be able to give you the reasons. Then again, they might, but I can tell you why Scripture forbids this. I can give you the whole history of it if you want. And so, yeah, but that's the thing, is it doesn't seem like Harris is so willing to look deeply into all kinds of things, but he's not willing to look deeply into his most, into the opponents he criticizes the most. He's just not. This is pretty thematic throughout this debate, and unfortunately, Peterson doesn't give good answers here. So that's one piece of the homosexual, the reason why homosexuality is forbidden in Scripture is because it's fundamentally an act of violence. Sodomy is not something that the human body is meant to endure. It's not a healthy thing to engage in, and there's some pretty good scientific research on this. And so again, that's the argument I would put forth. Is it okay if a woman agrees, if it's perfectly fine with her, that her husband beat her every day? Would you think that would be a good thing? Because that's maybe it's a little more extreme, but probably not. Not to get into the gory details of it, but you can go look at that yourself. Now, the origins, the reason that I'm convinced that Leviticus calls a man lying with another man as he lies with a woman an abomination is because this is one of the things that there were two reasons people would engage in homosexuality in the ancient Near East, in sodomy, actually, I should say. One was if you caught prisoners of war. That was one way to show your dominance over them, is you would sodomize them. That was an ancient Near Eastern practice. Okay. The other reason was, and this comes from Prager. If you read his new book on the Old Testament, is what if you do some studying on ancient Near Eastern practices of homosexuality, essentially, having a spouse was strictly for the purposes of having children, because they didn't have any contraception really to speak of in that day and time. And so if you had sex with a woman, there's a pretty good chance you were going to have a baby. And so in order to gratify oneself sexually as a man, you would have sex with boys. Generally it was young boys, because these guys weren't necessarily same-sex attracted. But they would do these sorts of things with young men because they looked like, and again, not to get into all the gory details of it, but they would have their fun with the boys and do their duty with their wife. That was an ancient Near Eastern practice, and that's the roots of homosexual behavior. Both very vile and repulsive practices. Now, let me hasten to add that I think the church has been at fault in how we've dealt with some of these issues in the past. We haven't dealt with this sin very lovingly, and I think that's been to our detriment. It's not been helpful, and I think going forward we should really think about some of these things. Now, I don't think where the Revoice guys are going, just to bring that in, is the best place to go. However, we still need to treat this like it's a sin, because it is harmful to people. It is not a good lifestyle to be engaged in, and this is why Scripture forbids it. That doesn't. That's the thing and that's the argument I would put to Harris. Simply is, I am convinced that this is not something that promotes, quote, human flourishing. I disagree with you, and that's why I think it's wrong, and why I would discourage the practice. Because to him, not, quote, allowing people to love whoever they want to love is just a religious taboo. It's just a religious taboo to him. The only reason people believe that, the only reason people are anti-abortion, quote unquote, is because it's a religious taboo, and that is absolutely not the case. There are good reasons why Holy Scripture forbids these practices, and good reasons why we should discourage them among people who we say we care about. See, I'm not advocating that there be a law written. Sodomy laws, these sorts of things, I don't think those things work. But what I do think is that as a society, as a culture, these are practices that we should discourage and say, look, this isn't good for you. I know you struggle with this or that propensity and that sort of thing. We can talk about that. We can talk about, how to deal with that. But just saying, okay, that's okay to go ahead and engage in it. No, that's not the way to go. We've talked about this many times. Let's move on to one more thing before we've got to quit for this week.
The same kinds of concerns about Christianity or Mormonism or Scientology or anything else, and the point is they're all different, and there's no reason to be, because Islam, to take the case where it's fine, Islam doesn't represent any impediment to stem cell research, right? Because they just don't think that the fertilized ovum is immediately ensouled. It waits 40 days or 80 days or 120 days, depending on what hadith you believe. So it's just that never came up when we were all complaining about how religion, in this case Orthodox Judaism and Christianity in the States, was posing an impediment to embryonic stem cell research.
Okay, so there I would have jumped on him again. This would have been the whole debate, honestly. I think they were just, for me. But I would have said, something even as pejorative as, then this is why I was so disappointed in what Ben Shapiro did. He didn't take Harris to task on some of these very specific moral issues. You remember us reviewing that back in the day. But I said, okay, So Sam, it's okay to kill babies to do research? That sounds kind of barbaric. You say that the Old Testament is barbaric. That sounds barbaric to me. Kill babies in the womb where they're most vulnerable and do research on them. Yeah, but they're not babies. Well, do you know that for sure? Has the research demonstrated clearly that life does not begin at conception? See, I'd bring this question up to him. Isn't it the least bit questionable? Again, the whole idea of one of his daughters being kidnapped. You wouldn't give up as a dad until you found a dead body. And then I would just argue that our scripture has given us this insight before we're able to discover it scientifically. And honestly, these two things, the homosexual indictment against Christianity and the abortion indictment against Christianity, these are Harris's two strongest arguments, period, end of story, against Christianity, is that we don't let people love whoever they want to love, and we impede embryonic stem cell research. That's his two best arguments against the horrors that Christianity has brought upon civilization. Because otherwise he can't point to one other thing. He can say the Crusades, he can say the Spanish Inquisition, the Salem witch trials. Okay, those were terrible, terrible things and never should have happened. And that, we can say, yep, those are major, major boo-boos by the church. And they are not prescribed by Scripture. The people were not following Holy Scripture when they proceeded to engage in these activities. But compared to Stalinist Russia, the few thousand that were killed in those events or affected by those events don't compare to the some 50 to 100 million tortured and killed by communist China and Russia. Doesn't even compare. And then he might say something like, well, Christians, in the United States believe we should keep... Oh, yeah, but you just said there are Christians on both sides of everything, so that's really not an argument now, is it? See, he's kind of wrapped up in his own game here. Anyway, we got to go for this week. I think we'll attack this a little bit more. Got a little passionate about this, it's pretty exciting stuff. Anyway, be sure to check us out on KNNA The Cross. Go to laymanstermsradio.org for your Kenyan Christian arts and to make your $50 donation to our well project. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
Hey, preacher man, give me the gospel. It brings salvation to those who believe. Hey, preacher man, give me the gospel. Tell me I'm a sinner and Christ died for me. I don't want to know about what you did last week on your summer vacation, what you saw, where you went, or how much it cost. Instead, won't you tell me all the words that give me salvation, how he lived and how he died for me on the cross. Hey, preacher man,